Hello, Professor Gruhn here. I am back. Sorry for the delay between the first video and the second one. The good news is the light turned on for me in waiting that I was struggling with trying to figure out a methodology for showing some of the examples in the book easily. So I've created yet another page that will uh, go along with the videos, and I'll try to use this methodology in future ones. So as an example here, take a look on the screen. You can see button 1 alert, button 2 prompt. So if I click on that, you can see the alert button appears. Click OK. Click here, a prompt button appears, hi there. Click OK. And then you entered hi there. So we've already covered that, but more important, take a look at what I did is the design of this page, the JavaScript code. Still, we're going to load all of the elements by ID. The elements are the elements that are on the page, and it's by ID, so everything that has an ID. So if we look down here, here are input elements that have button 1 and button 2 IDs. So these all get loaded in upon the page load. And on the window load, the functions will get set that when somebody clicks something, the button with the button 1 ID or the button 2 ID, that this function, do button 1 or do button 2, will get executed. So now what we can easily do is add a button 3, a button 4, a button 5. We can call the buttons whatever we want by way of IDs or anything there. So this sample code will be out here. And I'm just, instead of working on one function and commenting things out and uncommenting it out, I'm going to use this. And feel free to take this format, and it would be actually kind of cool that out on your website that you can create maybe a set of pages or a master page with a bunch of different buttons and examples. So for instance, I'm on page 71. I think that's where we've kind of left off. Um, I think we were doing some of the miles to the gallon stuff, and it started talking about on page 69, um, chaining the methods together to put things together. And now this date is a good example of another one. So now let's flip over to here. Um, as I've mentioned to those of you that have had classes with me before, I am not a strong object-oriented programmer. I started programming on mainframe systems back in 1969. However, if you are serious about becoming a developer, you need to dream, breathe, eat, sleep, and drink object-oriented programming. Now, I understand it and I do it, but it's not my primary job, so I always kind of struggle through a little bit. Now, the date object is a good example of, and JavaScript actually helped teach me um, about object-oriented programming better. So I'm on page 70 and 71, and if you take a look at this slide here, one line of code. Basically, we want to create a new object type. So you can actually design objects of your own, but there's this thing in JavaScript called a date object. Now, we can create a date object by this line of code, variable today, and that today can be anything. It doesn't have to be today. You can call it pizza, equals a new date object. Now, if you wanted to, you could actually create 3 or 4 date objects. You could, call one pizza, one ice cream, one whatever, and say var pizza equals new date object, var ice cream equals new date object. So you can have multiple variables, multiple objects within your code. So what I'm going to do is let's add another button. So I'm going to copy this line. Oops. And for consistency's sake, let's just call this button 3. I will modify the display, and we'll talk about date. And then what I want to do is just grab this, just grabbing the button 1 function. And so now we're going to say, and then we also have to add it to the window load as well. To make sure all the pieces work. When I started playing with this approach, this all of a sudden helped this to make a little more sense to me, and I hope it does for you as well. So now you see that, and then I'm going to just change this button 3 example of date. So now I've added the button, I've added it to the list, I've created a function called button 3. Now if I save this, and if I cross my fingers, refresh my page, there's button 3, and then I click that. This is button 3 example of date. And I don't like how that reads, so of the date object. Okay, so now let's just grab that code right here. And we're basically creating a new date object. Now the next page explains various methods that can be applied to the date object. And what we can do is grab, I could have grabbed the whole thing, but I'm going to grab all of these methods that are applied to the date object, the alerts. And I will save that, pull up our page, refresh it, hit the date, example of the date object, and then there's the, let's see, let me put this over here. There's the to date string, that's the full date and string right there. There's the full year. There's the date, and there's the month, the numeric value of the month. So now what we can see is we've created, I think, a nicer, cleaner testing harness for us that we can use. I like that. That's pretty clean. But now you can understand we've created a new date object, and we've seen the various methods that we're applying to that date object and displaying it. Okay, now back on page 71, the date object is on the top of the page and the string object's on the bottom of the page. Now I've gone ahead and made my example already, and it's in the sample code. And what this is talking about a few of the methods. Now trust me, there are a million methods for the string object, and you spend a lot of your time, especially in web development, in manipulating strings. So understanding the various string objects are really important. And oh, I just noticed one thing that wasn't there. Give me a minute, I'll be right back. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken page 70 and 71 talk about the string object as well. And as I just mentioned, a lot of strings get used a lot of times. So let's take a look at the code that I added to our testing framework. And so I've added a button 4. You can see down on the display there's a button for the string object. By the way, I also had to expand the width in the CSS of the labels to make that happen, but you'll already have that. And then I've added a button for function, and I've added the button for the onload. Now, what we're doing is we have an alert for that we're in the right object. We're creating a variable, a string object called that. And matter of fact, I believe I can actually go, I want to look something up. Okay, I just wanted to look something up. Right here, I had put, the book had said var name equals Grace Hopper. This is actually storing Grace Hopper into what is called a primitive string. And this text here is actually creating it into an object string. Both work, and we can go either way with that, depending. I'm going to run it this way. I want to strengthen my use of object-oriented programming and try not to just rely on how I've always done things. Let's pull up this guy. And so what I have here is the variable assignment, and then we're going to display that variable. We're going to convert it to uppercase and then display it. We're going to convert it to lowercase and display it. We're going to find out how long it is and display the length. We're going to find out where the space is, the index of that space, where is it located. The index of it is used a lot to be able to pull out certain parts of a string. I do that almost on a daily basis in another language I use at work. And a substring, here we're going starting from 0 to the index, to where that space is, pull out this. So this is a great example of pulling out the first name of a string text. So now here we go, we run it. There's the variable Grace Hopper, actually the object Grace Hopper. There is it converted, that variable converted to uppercase. There it is all converted to lowercase. The length of it is 12 characters. The index of that space is at place 5. The substring from 0 to 5 will give us Grace. So that's a good example, a running, working example of the code listed on page 71. Okay, so I've done a lot of work in the little half a second that this thing is blipped. And basically, I'm going to finish up the chapter, and I'm not going to go over, I'm going to go over a couple of the key points. But for instance, the if statement, you're not going to have to know every single nuance of the if statement or the loop statements, but you need to understand in general how they work. And I've come up with a couple of examples to show you those things. But first, what I did was I've modified the string, and we had Grace Hopper before, but now I've actually modified the code that if we said Paul, my actual full name is E, I'm going to put a lowercase there, B, Gruhn. I'm putting input in for the string variable instead of the Grace Hopper. I've left that code there. And then there's the variable name that got entered in. There it is in uppercase. There it is in lowercase. There's the length. The index of the first space. The substring of the first name is Paul. So to do that, basically what I did was I just added the text box, and I added this code that's actually getting the element by the ID, the value of name. And down here, you can see that I have a text box here. So I think this is an important concept to really grasp and understand, that you can have a text box, you can have a drop-down list, you can have a radio button, you can have anything you want on your form. And the idea is making your web pages dynamic. So in making your web pages dynamic, the user types something in, and in typing something in, you need to be able to access it. And so Here's the ini, which is the input, the label in the form. But then this piece of code here and this piece of code here is getting the value of the element called name. Now I'm going to move on to the if statement, and we're going to do the same thing, is that we're going to have a text box, and we're going to get the value called age. So let's take a look at this code since we're here already. And basically, we're going to see if a person did in fact provide an age, if it's less than 0, if it's greater than 18, or this is a fallout, and that actually should never happen, unless maybe it's a string variable. It'd be interesting to test that. So this is what is known as if logic, conditional logic, and those of you in my Python class, those of you with programming experience have seen it. The point is that if a value, if something is a certain number, or the person chooses a certain checkbox, you want to do something um, based upon the value. And here, what we're doing is we're going to basically do an alert based upon age and the value of age. So, so here I'm going to type in nothing. Example of the if statement. Your age is. So what happens was it defaulted as null to nothing. Um, Now if I type in minus 67, your age is minus 67. You haven't been born yet. That's based upon the if statement. Your age is 5. Your age is 5. And if I said 18, have you registered to vote yet? So the if logic is saying based upon the values that somebody typed, you can then do things within that code. And you'll see JavaScript code and jQuery code using the if statement a lot. And you'll get a lot of good details on page 74. And I want to make this video interesting enough and valuable enough, but not so long and boring. So 74, 75 cover that. 76 now introduces us to a while loop and a for loop. And I have two examples of the while loop and the for loop. And I pretty much pulled them right out of the book. So here's the while loop. We're in the while loop. And then the sum of the numbers and the number of loops. So there's the value for that. And then the while loop code is right here, where we have the first alert, which pops up, and then the value, the sum of numbers, how many loops. We have a counter, and then here's the while loop. While this situation is true, keep looping. And then at the end, I'm displaying that value. So now if I change the value number of loops from 5 to 10, and if I save that, refresh the page, now the numbers have changed because I've changed the top end of the while loop. I'm going to set this back to 5, but go ahead and make that change and just test it. Now also we have another example of the for loop. The for loop is a different version of looping, and it's a nice way of incrementing, going 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see here we're doing future value, a future value based upon we have an investment of $10,000 at 7% for 10 years. Now, what would be really easy to do is to take these numbers, investment, annual rate, and years, and convert them into text boxes. And then that way a person can type in those values, it would loop over and calculate the pieces. You know what? I'm going to modify this here. I'm going to run this first, then I'm going to modify this. Add something a little cooler to this now that I think about it. Okay, so this is the for loop. Click there, example of the for loop, and there's the future value, which is now $19,000. But let's do something a little slicker. Give me a second. Okay, so I've modified that code. You have the modified version, and what I did was added, where is it? Boom, 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 right here. I added this thing called value display, this variable called value display, and I'm creating a value displayed, just kind of a annual report. And I kept the future value display that was already there, and then I've added this to it. So now let's pull this up, and then we'll run the for loop. That's the first alert. There's the alert that was with the code. Now here you can see that it's concatenating and building each line for year 1, year 2, year 3. We could do some formatting and make that look a little prettier and all, but you can get the sense that you're actually going through a loop here. Now, so that's the for loop. The last thing is is arrays, and we use arrays a lot. I use arrays, especially arrays of objects for images and things like that. Page 78, 79, 80, and 81 are some good examples of arrays. And so if we hit the button for arrays, okay, we're in button 8, and you can see I have a list of months being displayed here. And though what happened was I created an array called months, and I assigned the value of each month into that array. And so here, there's the code where you can see I've created the display months variable. That's the final thing that got displayed at the end, and it got added to while we were going through a loop. And we're using the for loop at the same time. We have a new array being created, new array object called months, and then you can see each value. I am putting a list there, and then I have a for loop, which we already talked about. So here's another example of the for loop based upon the length of the months array. So that object months has a length, just like strings have lengths, arrays have lengths, how many items are in that array. And I'm building this variable months display, and then at the end I display it. Now, if you wanted to, you could now create another array, and we could build that. So let's say if you wanted to do like just the three-letter month. Actually, we could do this pretty slick. I have a neat line of code I'm going to add where I'm going to use the substring and the upper function, but we're not going to manipulate or add another array. Give me a second. Okay, so what I've done now is I've taken our months array and I've added things we've already talked about to the months array, a substring and an uppercase, concatenating it to a dash, and then still displaying the original months array here. So here now we're using some things we've already talked about and displaying this. And I've commented out the first one. I'm actually going to flip it back that by now you'll have to uncomment the one and vice versa. So here we just run our code, and notice here that we're getting the first 3 letters, the substring, getting the hyphen, and then getting the value of the array for that. And there's other things. You could actually add the counter itself to that if you wanted, but there's a lot of different things you can do with that. Okay, let's moving on. I don't think I'm going to give you any more examples in the book, but based on this, page 82, the good news is what we've just done with this button 1, button 2, all the way to button 8, we've actually created a bunch of different functions and been using them. I'm not going to discuss local and global variables, but basically local variables, the value of the variable is within the function. Global is throughout the whole set of code. You'll be not using too many globals. The only sense of a global you'll probably be using is the fact that a variable is coming from the DOM, from the form, into your function. Event handlers, there's a lot of different events that you can actually capture, and just like on the window load, we set those calls that when that event of a button is pushed, you can actually have other things already created for other events. And like for onload and other event handlers now on page 88, 89, We've kind of done some of this, and if you take a look at the code on 89, um, I think there's examples that they provide, but you could easily now put this code into this example or create your own. The future value one, that we've already gone through that, and we can make that a little slicker based upon the future value application. Some best practices, and then the summary. Yay, we're through in less than a half an hour. So I hope this new approach makes life a little simpler in trying to understand the language. I really struggled with the first video, and then a light turned on how I could best use this, and I'll try to use the same approach for future videos as well. Um, please do not jump ship. I am understanding that these first couple of chapters, chapters 2 and chapter 3, are going to be difficult. You're, like I've already said, that you are learning, you're learning. I would teach JavaScript has a language like I teach Python um, in a full semester. So you're basically being asked to take a 15-week introduction to programming class and learn it in 1 week. So do I expect you to know it all? No. But do I expect that you have some understandings how to start to think like a programmer and how to think logically? Absolutely. And be able to read some code and start to make sense with it. The other thing I'd like you to do is look up, and I'm going to find a bunch of links for you and put it on the course resources page. Look up and JavaScript Online Validator. So what you can do is actually take your JavaScript code, put it into an online validator, and it will tell you the errors that you have. It will find that missing curly Q bracket, it will find that missing semicolon, it'll find those little those weird things that you just can't find and figure out are those typos. So Google online JavaScript validator, and you'll be able to have it. So don't give up. Keep plugging through. Hopefully, you've got again, the goal is a high 30,000 feet um, eval of this. Chapters 4, 5 get a lot easier. Chapter 7 at the end of the book, it will get to be fun. But you have to have a programming foundation to understand how some of this works. The short exercises that we're doing are definitely very practical. And I'm not sure at this point if I put out the extra exercises, but those extra exercises, there's some really good examples of code there and stuff that you can do to build and enhance your website. So keep plugging, and I'm not going to be hardcore this first week or two on if a couple of things are a little bit late, but don't get too late on your assignments because again, this is 16 weeks crammed into 8 and it's 570 pages of a textbook. So we'll do it. We'll get there and keep plugging.